I am Hubert Williams, and I am a program supervisor with Church Home Society, working in getting young people adopted and matched and all, and sort of been around, just understanding family and the beauties of the family. Working in it, I pastored a church who every person in there was either a licensed foster care worker or had adopted some sibling groups. And so I've sort of been around this idea of what makes up family for the last 22 years of my life after getting out of the military.
So, to start with, you were in the military. Are you originally from North Carolina?
I am not. In fact, I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, and got to um, the Army by way of Nashville, Tennessee. Graduating high school there because my family wanted to move from Chicago because it was kind of getting a little crazy, and and they wanted to make sure that I have two younger brothers, that the boys, as they would call us, wanted to have a better environment in order to grow up and make sure that we didn't get caught up. And at that time, we were growing up on the west side, and everyone, of course, talks about the south side. That was the nice side. That was the suburbs, and of course, how time has changed that. And so, as my dad would say, I wanted to get y'all out of the wild, wild west before anything happened. So,
So, tell me a little bit about you and your upbringing and your family.
I think it's ironic. I remember being the only kid with both parents in some of the neighborhoods that we lived in, and that part was amazing because we did, transitioning from Chicago to down to the South. And I remember my dad couldn't find a job and he was sort of struggling. So he kind of went back up to Chicago to make money because he wasn't, you know, the epitome of it ain't what you know, it's who you know. And so he didn't have a lot of connections. And of course, we were coming and Nashville was new. And so most of the people they knew were in Memphis. They was not in Nashville. But Nashville, of course, was overcoming. And so, but I remember one of my friends saying to me, he said, I never would have thought you were smart. And you don't talk like you live in our neighborhood, and you don't look like you would be smart, but man, you are super smart. And I attribute that to my mom, who was a stay-at-home mom, and of course my dad. I mean, the epitome of work ethic. I mean, if the car broke down, he would walk to work, get up hours beforehand. And I think one of the things my mom would say is that you live in these neighborhoods, but this neighborhood won't live in you. And so I remember having all this wonderful sort of etiquette. May I be excused from the table? Having to do certain things before you even came to the kitchen table. That would be breakfast, and this sort of central place for us to meet at the table, and we had to be at the table. And so I've carried some of those things out now, but that was the foundation where we met. We at the table, we my mom was a singer, so even when it was time to do homework, she would sing to us these lessons and understand. We tease now because my mom used to sing my brother's name because he had a hard time spelling it. He was named after our grandfather, it was Spencer. And so we Spencer. And she would say it again. And it's one of those things I think that was the beauty of sort of, I can talk about in the neighborhood, the black family that even though it was different, we had those solid, strong, black women who was always there, and that community that was there. And so our house was one of those houses that my friends would come over and they would be like, "Man, I like your dad," and I'm like, "Well, I'm glad you like him." uh, but he was the fun dad, and my mom was the mom who was feeding the neighborhood. So it was just a beauty. And though the other children didn't have both parents, it was still so tight knit and so solid. So
So, tell me about your relationship with your dad. You talked to me a
yeah,
little bit about with your mom. What was your relationship like with your father?
I'm gonna be honest. I think it was a lingering longing, because he was working all the time. And I played all these sports and got into Boy Scouts and played football and baseball and basketball for the local center and some of the, sports teams. And my dad would always be there. Now he couldn't take me to practice because he was at work. Um, he may pick me up, but my mom, I don't remember my mom coming to any particular games, but my dad was always there. And let me tell you, kind of embarrassing, because he was also the loudest parent in the stands, and it wasn't, jeering. It wasn't that he liked to see good competition. And so it wouldn't matter who made the great play. He would be cheering for everyone on the field. And he would definitely be loud. And he wasn't one of those nagging parents either, put my boy in and nothing like that. He believed you earn your keep and you're rewarded for doing great work and that you work hard for everything you get. And so he was not one of those loudmouth parents like that, but he was definitely loud. And come on, baby, you got it. And it was one of those things that I'll be like, oh, here you go. And now, as a 47-year-old man, I turn back after coaching some of my older children and being a part of the AAU basketball and track and junior Olympics type things, with my older children. It's something I don't think I appreciated until then. And so he was the disciplinarian. He was the one you didn't wake up. He got the biggest piece of chicken, as we tease, um, and he ruled. It was you definitely knew he was in charge, and so to a degree, I've seen him check a lot of the grown men when we were growing up, and they would be like, I'm a junior." And they would be like, "I'm sorry, Hubert. I'm sorry." And he would maintain some level of order no matter what room he was in, and you knew that he was confident and all. So a little bit of conundrum because he didn't share a lot. My mom talked to us often about her childhood and growing up. My dad didn't share a lot, and I think that's the epitome of the black dad. Growing up in the '60s, '70s, and '80s, um, he didn't really talk a lot, but what he did say was profound most of the time. And it was final at that. It was not a lot of back and forth. I know we now applaud the ability for a 4-year-old to have a negotiation ability. You wasn't to negotiate anything. It was a send and receive conversation. He sent and you received, and that's how it was going to go. So
So, what did he send and receive that has stuck with you?
knowing that my dad had adopted my older two sisters, I was always thought to be his biological child. It was that family was important and that you were going to stick together. And we had a huge family. His family is the side that always had a family reunion. And so you got to know, and I would sit there with the older people and listen to the stories of them. Um, some of them, of course, came out of slavery. The other ones, of course, had life beyond, where they actually owned land and had things, and they were not a slave. And so I don't think we get to hear about those stories of the free black people, who were either here before, the European settlers came, or who was able to establish themselves, because they came over from somewhere else as well. And I have that in my family. Like we own that land. And so had I not had my dad in my life, had I not had these sort of salient pieces of information that you stand up, you tell the truth, you be accountable. A man is only as good as his word. And it was those things, like it was staunchly in that we are going to be absolutely present for the people we love. We can't dip out on responsibility. And it was one of those cool things that I didn't quite understand as a young man until I had my first child. And I remember writing him a letter and saying, I didn't know what I knew then. I wished for you to be at home more, to play catch and to have these wonderful father son things that I saw on TV. But I am so thankful that you did what you did and I got a chance to see it. And so we say action speaks louder than words. And his actions were always voluminous, where he was going to do what he needed to do in order to make sure that we were successful. And It sounds crazy, and I know it's sort of cliche, but moving from Chicago, where he was connected and grew up there and had all these pieces, and that we lived in these beautiful places and these houses and things, to coming to Nashville, Tennessee, where we had nothing, where we had to start all over again, to the point where my mid high, I think I may be a junior when we buy our first house in Nashville, Tennessee, and we are in this beautiful suburb. And I remember telling him, I am so happy we bought a house, but we just left civilization. And because, I was so used to being sort of in the inner city and having friends and everybody there. When you got to the suburbs of Nashville, nobody came out that house, but it was that piece, or hearing him when he became a supervisor with the city, having to be reprimanded for lying that he had a degree. And because he had a degree, and he said, well, you all wouldn't have gave me the job if you knew I was college educated. And it was one of those things that you would see that there was a difference, right?
Mhm.
But not necessarily understanding that, he got reprimanded for lying on the application because he didn't put that he had a college degree, because they would have told him he was overqualified, in order to take that job. And in doing so, like seeing all of him, I say in a talk that I give that the things that he wanted to cover up most made me the man I am today. That those unpretty things that we had to deal with as Black men, those unpretty things that you had to claw your way out of to get your family out of the projects, to come through, to almost be minimized in the presence, because as a dad you couldn't be with your family if your wife and your children needed assistance, and to go from that place of needing that assistance because he couldn't get hired, to getting connected, and he still actually works for the state now, 72 years old. And we tease about that because he says, well, shoot, I probably won't ever stop working till I'm dead. But it was that work ethic. It was the intestinal fortitude to stand up and be seen and be heard and not back down. And I think it made me the type of fighter I am now, in, the programs I've worked with children and families for, because I had that example of what it was to speak, even when it was probably scary to speak. But you spoke truth to power.
So I am very blown away by the lessons that you were able to glean from your father, seeing at the time that you described that you had to observe those lessons, more so than get a sit down where you can have a dialogue. So
Right.
when we first started our conversation, you shared that you recently learned that your father was not your biological father. Share with me what that journey's been like.
It's kind of wild because I just did it on a whim. I bought a Christmas gift for me and my wife. Her dad had just passed, and we were just trying to, get reconnected with roots and kind of figure out. I had had these stories from my father's side, but not from my mother's side, because we didn't have a lot of family reunions on her side. I mean, big family, get together, everyone knew each other, but it was wild. So it's kind of weird because my mom and dad thought they were cousins. That's how close their families was in Memphis, Tennessee, and sort of that state line Mississippi area. And but my father grew up in Chicago, and my mother, of course, grew up in Memphis. And that's what brought us back originally to Tennessee. And so for them, when they found out they were not family, I'll give in just a sneak peek, right, or a little insight. My mother's grandfather started a church with my father's mother, and he baptized my father's mother. So my great grandfather on my maternal side baptized my paternal grandmother, and flip side, my maternal grandfather lived with my paternal grandfather's family. And in fact, on census records, it shows that they lived together. And so because of that connection, they went to school together with, siblings. Um, uh, it was wild. And so that's how close knit they were. And I didn't know this until just recently. And I was doing all this ancestry work to find out that, wow, they were really, really close. And that this connection was going on. And you would see these names on the centerpieces of some of the churches that they built. And when I say they built churches, they built at least 8 churches in the Mississippi, Memphis area, all Baptist churches. I'm a minister. Well, I'm a pastor at this point, but went to a Baptist seminary. So there's a lot of connection. But that's when I found out that my DNA was matching with another family that no one knew. And so that conversation hit with a few of those family members because they're trying to figure out how we're related. And then I get a call from a young lady in Chicago, and she's like, "I think you're my brother." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know about that." Um, but my father, who I am named after, who I thought was my biological father, had told me plenty of times, and at that time, to where I thought he was being cruel because I was so different than the other boys. Um, I would tease because I'm really short, 5'6" or so and some change, and my other brothers are nearly 6 feet, and my father is nearly 6 feet. And so it was like, man, I got all this athletic genes, but I did not get that height. And so, but then that was periods of time where there was contrast too, because he had like hair on his chest, and I did not want that taco meat. I didn't. Please, no, God, thank you. And so, because of that, I now know, why. At 47, I didn't need a new dad, but I was so thankful I knew what my nose and my mouth and the shape of my head. And if you saw pictures of my biological father, who is still living, such a great dad and a great grandfather, I look exactly like him. And we would not have to have a DNA test if they would have just sent pictures, right?
Mhm.
But in facilitating that conversation with my sister, her name is Alex. And I said, okay, Alex, if it's true, tell your dad, pay half, I'll pay half. We'll get this DNA test. And on that morning where the results came back, who I thought was my namesake, right, walks in the room to my mom and just arbitrarily says to her, I know that boy knows I'm not his dad. I know he knows it. Just like that. No discussion, because I didn't have results. I wasn't going to talk about this. Um, but that was weird. At 3 o'clock, that was 9 a.m. At 3 o'clock, I thought I was going to be devastated, but I wasn't. I'd had such a great example of how to be a dad that I had mostly boys. I have two biological daughters. Um, but I had been a dad ever because I saw this example. I call them surrogate kids, but basically they're my adoptive children. And I got like four of them, two girls, two boys. And then even in my blended family where my wife came in with the previous child, I adopted him. And so I had these sort of milestone moments of knowing I'm going to be a boy's dad. And of course, just recently, she's 4 years old. Um, and we had a daughter to pass, but I don't think had I not had that example, right? He was a musician, and I'm a musician. My dad sings, I sing. It's all of those pieces that if my biological father, it probably would have been way more calmer and all of that. But I don't know what I would have gotten. So after 47 years of being, the junior, right, to a man who is not my biological father, it is so eye opening. And many people walked up to me and said, wow, after finding out, you seem so much more whole. And I think we all need a piece of that wholeness. But the key to that wholeness was that I was never incomplete. I just had more information, right? Because I
Mhm.
did wonder, am I adopted? Because my thought process was different. We would bump heads, me and my dad. We had different ways of doing things, and um, but that reconciliation that happened when I became a father changed everything. Because you don't know what you don't know, and so because we built this strong huge relationship. My mom is there for everybody. She's trying to give advice to everybody. She is the epitome of the helicopter grandparent and parent. All of my siblings live right around the corner from my mom and my dad. I'm the only one who lives miles away, right? We're talking about we're 400 or 500 miles away. And in that, I was also the only one who left, you know, and went into the military. My father was in the military, so he was Air Force, I was Army. He would tell me I'm crazy because you should just aim higher, is what he would say. But in the end, our paths were so very much different. But they had this synergy that would come back, and I would talk to him about things, and he would have these moments of wisdom. I'll give you one. When I became a pastor, I'd been preaching for a little while, but when I became a pastor, my father said this: don't give them lip service, give them life service. And it was one of the things that I thought that was so profound that only he could have said that. And in saying that, it pressed upon me, right? Made a huge indentation that I didn't want to be one of those pastors who would get into the rut of doing things that was just for the show. And I wasn't a flashy guy anyway. I was very conservative in that, but it really made that impact. And I realized I've been working in human and health services for the last 22 years, first as a, case manager, then a therapist, and now doing what we do now, with children and families and adoption and foster care and all. But I knew I had people's lives in my hands, and I didn't ever want to give them lip service. I wanted to give them life service. And I can do that in every area of my life. And so showing up, being authentic, being present, knowing that what we do and say really matters to the people we love was really instrumental. And that's kind of like summing up him. And since I had that, and since I saw him matriculate through life, right, and graduate these wonderful milestones and be at a place to now, I tease him and I call him rich now because they have over 37 grandkids and now like 15 great grands. And I said, we talk about money being rich, Dad, but you are a rich man, you know. So to the degree that our relationship became so great that he was my best man at my wedding.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
So, knowing what you know now, you shared before we started recording that you also adopted a son. Um,
absolutely.
Talk to me about your son.
Yeah. It's kind of wild because i- in talking to him now, sort of reviewing what we experienced. He passed away in December in a one car accident. And I tease and say he had a need for speed. He probably was racing somebody. I'm sure he was because he had a nice souped up CTS. That thing had like 625 horsepower. But he wasn't a reckless guy. But at 7, I get a chance to meet this wonderful little boy who had never met his biological father. I had already become a dad and I had 2 previous young men, twin boys, who were um, already, lock, stock, and barrel with me. But I was in the military and had got a divorce, and so I met his mom in the military, and I remember the day at 7 when he said, about 3 months after us meeting, "Can I call you Dad?" And I was like, "Absolutely! I find it an honor to be called Dad." And so one of the things I always talk about is this dream I had when I got the mandate to really be a father for him. Um, in that, and it sounds kind of bad, but in that I saw a basin on a table with a pitcher inside this basin, and it was sooty or kind of this coal ash type. And the spirit in the dream says to me, "There's a pitcher on the outside with clear liquid. I think it's water." He said, "Pick it up and pour." So as I'm pouring into this pitcher with soot in a basin, it is just making really dark, muddy water. But the spirit said, "Keep pouring." And in that, I keep pouring to eventually that all the soot comes out of the pitcher in the basin, and now all the soot is on the outside of the jar, but it's now clear liquid on the inside of the pitcher. And in that, it said, you don't know what impact you're going to have on him, but you keep pouring. And I would say to him, in that, I know I'm talking to you right now, son. I know I'm talking to you right now, but you have no reference point of what I'm saying. None whatsoever. So right now, I just need for you to listen and recognize that you're going to need this information at some point in your life. And I tease, I had a chance to eulogize him and funeralize him. And one of the things I said from the pulpit was this. I said, he lived the philosophy that I preached. Be a good man. Be accountable. Show up. Be authentic. Knowing what you do and you say really makes a difference for the people you love. I showed him how to love his mother. Not that he needed that, but I let him know that you love her. You only get one. And so you love her despite, in spite. Just keep loving her. And when I say he took, very good care of her, and it was kind of one of those things that many people didn't know the level of impact. But if he had a question, or he had a buddy, he worked there as a he of course went to the military, but he also came back and worked there as a mail carrier. And so if he had any one of them having questions about spirituality or the Bible or whatever, he would be like, "Tell him, Dad, you get him straight." And it was one of those things that I tease, like, wait a minute, you were hard pressed to take some of these lessons, but now you have them. And he was just rounding 30. He was in a wonderful relationship. They were probably going to get married. But I remember telling him, when you do get married, I know I'm the preacher. I know I marry everybody. But listen, I'm just going to be a dad that day. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to watch you get married, because I think that's a beautiful milestone. Because he who was like, I ain't having no kids, I ain't never getting married, um, became really, really great. And he took very good care of his girlfriend. Like, he really was there for her. And I had a chance to work with her because of him. We did a wedding together, and she was a wedding planner and I was the officiant. And it was amazing. And I just sat back and watched him as he had sort of matured to this fine young man. And you don't want to see it, but I was so happy to see how many people came, and he had touched so many people, sort of a walking, talking arm and hands and feet of the Creator. And he didn't do it like I did it, but he definitely did it in that way. His name was Khalil, and he made me really proud. He makes me really proud, and I just understood that I didn't quite understand the deep level of impact. And he was such a good man. And I, I still struggle. Of course, we haven't got a police report. I struggle, like, it feels so surreal that he is not here. But man, from asking, can he call me dad, to us going through every milestone, teasing, because people would say he was 6'2". People would be like, y'all look just alike. And we would look at each other and we would crack up laughing. And I guess I said, you feed them long enough, I guess they do look like it. And I remember my father putting so much pressure because he had adopted. He was like, listen, um, you need to adopt that boy. And so when I was able to adopt him, and he was like, I want to keep my name because y'all at the back of the line. And he was a good man. And but I was so thankful that day. I could make sure he knew um, that he was not fatherless. He was absolutely a dad, and by all accounts, that's how he referred to me everywhere. I mean, in fact, people didn't even know he had a different biological father. I was his dad, and he was my son, and it was beautiful. Sometimes I don't know if I'm gonna get through that with tears or whatever, because we just don't know what it brings. But I am elated. God had done me a real solid to show me um, in that fashion of how just being an honorable man uh, impacts um, your offspring.
All I can say is wow, because when we first started our conversation, You use the words that, family being a universal source and being a beautiful tapestry. And with your story, you have weaved together that tapestry to share, you know, all the interconnected pieces that came from different places, kind of like a quilt,
Right.
as being African American, quilts tell your family story. You have so many pieces of your quilt that's keeping your family together and keeping your family warm. And so, in our last few minutes together, thinking about your life and your life trajectory and everything that you've experienced, tell me, what does family mean to you?
I I I say it jokingly, but I used to want to be the black. I used to listen to a program called Focus on the Family. I used to want to be the black Dr. Dobson. Um, they didn't talk about a lot of our issues, but they talked about family. And family has been the thing that's the one constant that has been a beautiful, deep level of identity for me. Right. And finding out that, of course, my biological father was different, I haven't had that chance to kind of understand that heritage. But I was just talking to my sister this past week and said, I got so many questions because I want to know that history. And to be the historian of my family now, to bring together all the ancestry stuff that I've found and from the news clippings to the obituaries, um, it has been the one solid thing that I started to recognize from a spiritual place, that you were born into a family of families of families, and that that source, creator, universal energy did very much on purpose. And so one of my sayings is that family isn't perfect, but it's still family. And I think in unpacking that we always talk about how, you know, dysfunctional family is, but it's really a dysfunction of function, right? And that we have these characters in our families that if we step back for a moment and gain that level of, I always say we have hindsight first, and then we have insight. Then we get to a place of wisdom and where we have foresight. And if we can get to a place where we got that bird's eye view, we would see just how beautiful God created family, and that you were born specifically to a family for a reason. They are your parents for a reason. They were your grandparents for a reason. And if we can glean what that reason is, it is great. And I think I've done that in my family. And I think it informs everything I do now. And so, what I do for children and how I stress to them, like, you may not necessarily want to be in your family, but understanding that family, understanding your identity is so huge. So, it means everything to me. It is the sole source of connection. It is where I get my esteem, you know, where the value was first assigned, and to understand that even in feeling out of place at first, because I thought different, it was different. I was definitely different than they were, and then understanding the differences and why. I remember telling my sisters, dad is not my dad, and she says, well, you guess what? It don't matter. You still my brother. It don't matter. And it was funny because I didn't need that reassurance, but I understood what she was saying and why it was so important for her, that nothing was going to separate us. And that's kind of like the idea of, not to be preachy, but scripture, it said nothing can separate you from the love of God. I think that love of God, being in family, helps me because I'm always connected. No matter what I did, I could be received again. I can be restored again. And it was cool because I was always going to be their brother. I was always going to be their son. And I couldn't be disowned no matter what I did. And I think that is the beauty of family.
I don't know what else to say behind that, because I think that is one of the most prolific ways I've heard family described. And I think about the work that you do and how you're taking that message of identity, love, and family to the children and family that you serve in our community. As a parent, I adopted all three of my children, and I'm in a blended family. So I have some stepdaughters, which I call my bonus daughters. They're, are adults and teenager. And so we really define family very differently. But I love that you said that there's a purpose for family. Even if you're born into a family that you don't live in forever,
Right.
you have a purpose in your life, has purpose and value. And so, Hubert, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Like, you're probably going to be one that I end up sharing the entire story because it's so beautiful. You can't have the foreground without the background.
Absolutely.
In the background that you've created has really shed a light on what we can continue to do in our communities to support families, whether it's the family you're born into or the family that God placed you into.
Absolutely.
So I thank you, and I will share next steps with you soon.
Thank you so much, Tori. Good meeting you,
Thank
and
you.
absolutely great talking with you.
And if I could ever be of help or support, hit me up. Let me know.
We'll definitely do so.
Thank
All right.
you. Thank you for listening to this story from the Institute for Family Shine On North Carolina initiative. Hear the full story and discover how you can share your own by visiting our website at instituteforfamily.org.